My patrons spoke, and I listened. Today, we're talking the culture, the traditions, the history of masks in professional wrestling. It's next. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. Throughout my career, I've been very fortunate because I have worked in front of the cameras as a professional wrestler, referee, ring announcer, and commentator. And I've also worked behind the scenes as a promoter, booker, agent, coach, and consultant. And every time I rattle all those things off, I think about all the other jobs I've also done in wrestling, and I think, should I elongate this to include those jobs? And then I say, no, Mike, the intro's long enough. Today, I want to talk about masks in professional wrestling with a special emphasis on Mexican Lucha Libre. And I know a lot of times we think of pro wrestler and luchador as being practically interchangeable, but the truth is there's a big difference between American pro wrestling and its Mexican cousin, Lucha Libre. They are different forms with different origin points, and we might touch on a little bit of that as we go. But let's talk about masks. So let's start with a little history. You may know the first masked man to ever step between the ropes appears at the World's Fair in Portugal way back in 1865, and he's simply billed as the Masked Wrestler. It's believed that the Masked Wrestler was actually Frenchman Theobald Bauer, but whoever it was underneath that mask, they continued to perform as the Masked Wrestler for at least the next 3 years, taking part in both wrestling shows and strongman shows in circuses across continental Europe. And then, after just a few years, they vanish. Fast forward about 50 years, and a wrestler billed as the Masked Marvel begins to appear in wrestling results from New York State. And there are plenty of wrestlers who would go on to call themselves the Masked Marvel, but the original is a veteran wrestler, Mort Henderson. At this point, though, the Masked Marvel, the Masked Wrestler, these are anomalies. They are novelties. There isn't yet any trend nor any tradition around masked wrestlers, but that all begins to change in the 1930s in Mexico. Are you getting something out of today's video? Are you enjoying this content? Then please leave a like-a-palooza down below. I'd appreciate it. The oldest promotion on earth, EMLL, which is alternately referred to as CMLL throughout the decades, is founded in 1933. And promoter Salvador Luteroth frequently imports American wrestlers to help build up his card during EMLL's formative years. During their first year in business, he brings a Texas-based wrestler down to Mexico City, an American named Corbin Massey, who, throughout his 21 years in the wrestling business, performs under a variety of guises, most famously as Cyclone McKee, but also as Mr. X, Black Dragon, Gray Mask, etc. He's another guy referred to as the Masked Marvel, just like Mort Henderson was back in 1915. When he arrives in the ring under a mask in 1934, it becomes an instant sensation. Newspapers call the Masked Wrestler hated and mysterious. And his image alone appearing on posters or in print advertisement means an instant increase in ticket sales. But the floodgates really open just 3 years later. That allows for widespread acceptance of masks in Lucha Libre and a culture that develops around them. In 1936, newspapers around the world begin to syndicate the adventures of comic strip superhero, the Phantom. This is 3 years before the creation of Batman. And the Phantom's comic strip does inform a piece of early mask culture because he is almost never depicted with his mask off. And if the image of the Phantom seems a little familiar to you, we can connect some dots. That costume is exactly what Rey Mysterio Jr. pays tribute to in his legendary Halloween Havoc match against Eddie Guerrero. And something else changes in 1936 as well. Corbin Massey, the erstwhile Masked Marvel, leaves Mexico for California. So in the late 30s and into the early part of the 1940s, interest and demand for more masked wrestlers swells in Mexico. At the same time, Lucha Libre is starting to carve out an identity for itself, independent of pro wrestling in the United States, with less and less reliance on American imports. Early wrestling masks were crude by today's standards. They were usually limited to a single, bold color with simple detailing around the eye or the mouth ports. And this detailing around the facial features is referred to as the antifaz of the mask. The ubiquity of masks in Lucha Libre is thanks to the explosion in popularity of El Santo following the Second World War. By the 1950s, he's the star of movies, he's the subject of comic books, and an overwhelming number of luchadors to follow are inspired by El Santo. They start to take mask ideas from pop culture, from folk tales, from Mesoamerican rituals and traditions, and practically anywhere else they can snatch inspiration. And just some of the most recognized masks on a worldwide basis include, of course, El Santo, but also his eternal rival and frequent movie co-star, Blue Demon, the high-flying Mil Mascaras, and the freakishly strong El Canek, or a few more modern references include AAA's Octagon and CMLL's Atlantis. Overall, masked wrestlers are less numerous here in the United States than they are in Mexico, and yet there's no denying the enduring legacy of masked greats like The Destroyer, Big Van Vader, or the aforementioned Rey Mysterio. Over in England, no masked wrestler captured the public's imagination quite the way Kendo Nagasaki did during the height of Wrestling on the World of Sport program that was televised by ITV. And a lot of pages and ink are spent on Kendo Nagasaki in Simon Garfield's excellent book, The Wrestling. Grab yourself a copy if you ever come across one. I loaned mine out to one of my trainees years ago and I never got it back. It's great. In Japan, masked wrestlers are practically synonymous with junior heavyweight wrestling. This begins in 1981 with Tiger Mask, and it's reinforced with the debut of Jushin Thunder Liger in 1989. But then it's really cemented into the culture during the 1990s, thanks to the work of the great Sasuke, Ultimo Dragon, Hayabusa, and others. For more on the emergence on the junior heavyweight style of wrestling, check out my book, Pro Wrestling History, 6 Threads and 16 Decades, because one of the 6 threads I trace through all of wrestling history is junior heavyweight style. And that conversation really begins with Tiger Mask. The traditions of mask culture emerge where masks are most widely accepted, and that's in Mexican Lucha Libre. It should come as no surprise that the notion of mask being sacred comes from El Santo. His name literally means the saint. And just like comic strip superhero The Phantom, El Santo is never seen without his mask. The lengths he would go to protect his secret identity are the stuff of legend. He was the first to have custom masks built with an open mouth so he could eat meals without taking his mask off. He would travel separately from the production crews on his movies to make sure they would never glimpse his face. And legend has it, he maintained 2 separate wardrobes, one for El Santo, one for his secret identity, so that if he ever went out in public unmasked, he would never be seen wearing the same suit or tie that El Santo owned. The most famous masked man in all of wrestling history really set the tone and conveyed a message to the legions that he inspired, which was this: protecting your secret identity is worth the extra effort. That mystique has value. And even though several of the earliest masked wrestlers of note, like Theobald Bauer or Mort Henderson, had little or no connection whatsoever to Lucha Libre, ultimately, a lot of the traditions around masked wrestlers come directly from Mexico. In a broader historical context, masks are a status symbol. masks appear recurringly in ancient Mesoamerican cultures, like that of the Olmecs or the Incas, and they're often imbued with religious significance. Those masks are made with some of the rarest and most precious materials available, like jade or obsidian, and in that way, they are a status symbol. They come at great cost when they're made of rare and valuable materials like that, and they've got associations with the supernatural, with the superhuman. These connections to Lucha Libre are often overt. The luchador Sangre Azteca, his name literally translates to Aztec blood. El Canec is referred to as the Mayan prince. All of these influences and traditions, they flow downstream into the great Lucha Libre melting pot. Many tenets and elements of mask culture are informed by something far less ancient than the traditions of the Aztecs or the rituals of the Maya people. It's informed by superhero culture. Even in the earliest comic books, film serials, and television shows, superheroes worked hard to protect the anonymity of their secret identities. The late great Adam West put it beautifully in the 1966 Batman movie when he addresses a journalist saying, "If Robin and I remove our masks, the secret of our true identities will be revealed, completely destroying our value as crime fighters." In other words, the mask has intrinsic value. That secret identity is worth protecting. This value is inherent in the drama of mask versus mask matches. At the end of the bout, somebody will be unmasked. That carefully maintained anonymity will be forever destroyed, and that long-held secret identity will be revealed to the world. At the end of a mask versus mask match, that status symbol is stripped away, never to be worn again. And in a...
Well, isn't this a fun little glitch? Thanks, iMovie. What I was saying in this clip was that in a mask versus mask match, where the result is permanent, the destruction of the mask's value often also means the destruction of a luchador's career.
Those who understand mask culture realize, in that moment of revelation, all mystique is lost. A larger-than-life character simply disintegrates. An identity is killed in the moment of unmasking, and what remains is common, ordinary, vulnerable. And this may also signal the end of a luchador's time as a star attraction. It may signal the end of their ability to function as a draw. After all, there's a reason why we all flock to see a movie titled The Batman, and why no movie studio will ever promote a film called Bruce Wayne. The sanctity of the mask is baked right into the rule system of Lucha Libre. To illegally unmask an opponent is strictly prohibited. It results in immediate disqualification outside the confines of a mask versus mask match or some other lucha de apuesta, that is to say, a match with a wager. And together, this confers a great deal of importance, a great deal of significance onto the mask itself. I think the traditions of masked wrestling are really important. Traditions clarify our identity, they strengthen our bonds, and they supply consistency. The traditions of masks in pro wrestling have been handed down throughout the last 8 or 9 decades now. They connect us to the legends of the past, like El Santo, like Jushin Liger, and will allow the masked heroes of tomorrow to connect back to us. When we honor these traditions, it's our sign of gratitude and appreciation for those that upheld them throughout their lives and careers, and we show our respect for them by continuing those traditions and by handing them down to the next generation. To simply disregard the traditions of mask culture is to simultaneously both excuse ourselves from the rich and fascinating history of pro wrestling and lucha libre, and to disrespect the sacrifices made and the trails blazed by the dedicated few who made something so fun and dynamic and vibrant that it still exists for us to enjoy today, some 150 years after the first masked man stepped between the ropes. If you want to better understand the differences between American pro wrestling and Mexican Lucha Libre, then the video appearing on screen is just for you. And if you want to learn even more about professional wrestling, come join my community over on Patreon. There's a link to that as well. I just published an exclusive video about how the creators of South Park clarified some pro wrestling psychology. No joke. You can join us for as little as $5 a month.